What's up, fellas? Welcome to Man Up Friday with Mike, your mentor. Appreciate you taking the time being with me. We're running a little bit late tonight. The slides took a little longer to make than what I thought, so my apologies. If you're watching the replay, thanks for joining us. Show us some love, or joining me, I guess. Yeah, some good stuff tonight. I'm excited to dig into this. Hope you guys have been having a good week. Looking forward to the warmer weather here where I'm at in Michigan, and getting out, celebrating a couple birthdays tomorrow. But we're going to dig into this. If it's your first time to this page, just to give you an idea of what we do, well, I post every single day of the week, but on Fridays we dig into this workbook, which is called The Quest for Authentic Manhood by Robert Lewis. And this is something that was brought to me that I don't think was any coincidence when I was at a bad place in my life. A little background on me is I had a tough upbringing. Dad was in and out of prison until I was age 10. Then he came back into our life when I was 15. That lasted a couple months, and he ended up getting in a huge argument with my mom, which led to him coming back to the house high, him tearing off his shirt in the front yard, picking up a good, a nice sized boulder, rock, throwing it through the front window of our door, and then my mom calling the police and threatening him to go back to jail for his behavior. And he got scared and he took off, and he disappeared, and we didn't really hear from him. And then that set into motion a cycle of him showing up every 2 years for the next 6 years, basically unannounced or with a little heads up. So he showed up at my high school graduation, and then said that he would be there for me, my brother, and my sister. And then after the graduation, he disappeared again. Then 2 years later, he showed up when my brother tragically committed suicide. Said the same thing. He changed his ways, and he was going to be the dad and the father that he always should have been. But then he disappeared again. And then he gave me a call the day before I was supposed to graduate from college. And in that conversation, he told me when I saw him not to be scared. And when my mind finally caught up to those words as he continued to go on in his sentence, I stopped him and said, "What do you mean, don't be scared?" And that's when he proceeded to tell me that he had stage 4 liver cancer and he wasn't sure how long he was going to live. Didn't end up making it to my graduation. Fast forward a couple days later, I go and see him at my godfather's house, and he's right. He's scary. His eyes are all sunk in the back of his head. His skin is pulled super tight to his bones. I mean, he's shriveled away, wasting away. He's probably like 110 pounds, and he was a big guy, bigger than me, or thicker and more stout than me. And he always looked extremely young for his age. And it was sad. And I really wanted to have a hardened heart towards him at that moment, but I didn't. Just by the grace of God, I guess, and we were able to just talk for about 20 minutes, and he told me he was proud of me and that he loved me, and then he had to go lay down because he was tired, and he ended up dying shortly after that. And that really messed with me, and I really didn't understand what that meant, and the 23 years of my life of really not having my dad be there for me, the ramifications of that, until I was at the funeral, and this all came to a climax, and I looked down in his casket, said my last goodbyes, and walked back to my seat. And as I walked back to my seat, I just got extremely angry and started crying, and sat there in my seat with my head buried in my hands in my lap, and literally, like they say, when you die, your life flashes before you. Well, my life was flashing before me in that moment, and I was going over every single moment in my life, and like he was hardly in any of them. and that just would make me angrier and angrier. And I was like, the guy in the box doesn't know anything about me. He doesn't know what my favorite foods are. He doesn't know what I like to do when, you know, I'm not in school and I'm not working. He doesn't know what kind of books I like to read. He doesn't know what my favorite color is. He doesn't know anything about me. And that's when I heard God's audible voice speak to me clear as day, and it said, "I know everything about you, son." And this amazing peace came over me. Immediately, I was no longer angry. All the crying stopped. It's really undescribable the way that happened. And that was kind of the next evolution or the next journey in my life of discovering what it meant to be a man and what it was like to eventually be a husband and be a father, because I didn't have that stable role model in my house to figure that out. And I've screwed up so much along the way and made huge mistakes that I've shared with you guys on this page as I've tried to discover this for myself. And that brings me back to the quest for authentic manhood. And, you know, here I am married a couple years later, living in Chicago. Just like 2 weeks into my marriage, just revealed to my wife a horrible secret that I had been keeping from her for a long time, and trying to figure out, rebuild my marriage, rebuild my life, figure out what I'm gonna do, like who I am, and I'm in this dark space, and really all I want is for someone to reach down and tell me that it's gonna be alright, and to come and sit beside me and say, "I got you, man." And that's what happened, really in a nutshell, because I heard about this church and I went to check it out, and they were going through they were going to be starting going through this workbook, and something was like, I need this. And I ended up joining these guys. Didn't know any of them. None of us knew each other. Like, I think there was 4 or 5 of us at this table, and every week we'd go through a section in this workbook, and it began to change my life as it talked about these things that I had never heard about before, right? And the saying that you don't know what you don't know is so true. And as I absorbed these things and listened to them and dwelled on them, all these light bulbs started going off in my head, and I was able to connect the dots. And then I got to a point where I had to make some hard choices. Am I going to go back and deal with these things and face these things and work through them, or and become a better man, a better husband, a better father, a better leader in my community? Or am I going to let these things own me and control my life? And it was very scary, and it was very hard. And it took a lot of hard work with me, with my wife, with my mom, with dealing with the holes that I had in my heart from my dad. But I was able to do that. And my life wasn't a cakewalk after that, but it was the next evolution, the next thing, and me becoming the man that I was supposed to be. And this has made such an impact on my life that I want to share it with others, and share this knowledge and this wisdom so that others can walk in the same freedom that I've been able to. So this is what Friday nights are based around, is what I learned in this book. And this is not my material. This belongs to Dr. Robert M. Lewis, but I'm just sharing it because it's made such an impact on my life. So let's dive in and check out what we got for tonight. And then if you're interested, you know, you can go back through the videos. They're all labeled, and you can work through the first half if that's something you're feeling impressed upon your heart to do, because this is the second week of the second half, where we really start to move forward, since we've already looked back and dealt with these wounds that we've had. So let me share my screen here. Broadcast system audio, please update. What? Do that in a minute. It's better be hearing me. Pretty sure you guys can hear me because somebody said stuff to me before on this. Alright, okay. Here we go. Oh, I gotta get rid of this thing a minute. Sorry, distraction on my end. Alright, so this is entitled Saddle Up for the second half. because this picture is appropriate because it's like riding a bull. Sometimes life, you're just, as men, we're just holding on, hoping we don't fall off, and we're doing everything that we can just to get a tighter grip, and to keep our balance. And as I talked about in my own story, I know what that's like, right? Like, I was trying to hold on to my marriage, was trying to hold on to my identity, my life, who I was, my career, where I was going, like, and it's crazy. So I thought this was appropriate. So we're gonna pick up where we left off last week, and in the first semester, with just a quick review before we get into tonight's material. But we spent the first semester of men's fraternity unpacking our wounded manhood, and we talked about the 4 different wounds that every person experiences. Right? It doesn't matter if you're a man. I mean, women experience these wounds as well. This is geared more towards men because I'm a man, but I know there's some ladies that watch this and share this content. So, this stuff is wisdom. Wisdom knows no sex, it knows no bias, it knows no prejudice, doesn't care male, female, transgender, black, white, whatever the case may be. Wisdom is wisdom. So the first wound we looked at was the absent father wound. And you could have a house you grew up in where your dad was physically present, but maybe he wasn't emotionally or mentally present. Or maybe you grew up in a household like me where your dad wasn't there and he abandoned you, and you had to deal with abandonment and the loss of rejection. And then we talked about the overly bonded with mother wound, and how because of the birth process and the way God made that, and that's such a special process, that women, they carry the infant in their tummy for 9 months, right, as it grows, and it's almost one with mom, and then there's this physical separation as the baby is born, and then they have to cut the umbilical cord, and then the toll that physical separation brings in that relationship, plus the emotional separation that can bring in the relationship, and what it does. Not that it's wrong to a lot of women as they experience things like postpartum depression. And even if they don't, as they begin to raise this infant and love on it and nurture it, and it almost becomes their whole entire, well, for some ladies, it becomes their whole entire life as they nurture and raise this infant up. There comes a point where, for men or for young boys, we start to realize that we have to strike out on our own path, and we start to push away from mom. And mom can do a couple of things. Mom can, be that helicopter mom and hover over us and try to keep that tight rein on what we're doing. Or mom can feel rejected again, and all the emotions and everything that comes with that, and do everything she can to hold on to that relationship, and manipulate that relationship, not out of evil intent, but out of good intent, because of how much they've invested in us. And as men, we can't relate to that because there's nothing in our lives where we're in the position to have to nurture, to carry another human, then give birth to it, then nurture it, like women do. So boys have to make a break for their mom, and it has to be a healthy break. And we talked about what that looked like. And if it wasn't a healthy break, what you needed to do, or some ways that you could go about making that happen. Then we looked at the all alone wound, which is probably a wound that I would say, in my experience, man, the majority of men face. And this comes from a lot of things. Comes from men don't cry, we suck it up, we keep our feelings inside, we lie to ourselves about how we feel, and we lie to others about how we feel. which leads us to not be authentic, which leads us to separate ourselves in fear of embarrassment or judgment, and then we retreat to this place of okay, it's on me, it's just me, it's only me in this journey. I'm just gonna do it. We make those kind of statements, and I'm as guilty as anyone, of doing that. Because my MO sometimes when the pressure's on is, excuse my language, but I'm just like, F it, I'm gonna do that. I'll make it happen. Then I'll do it. Whether it's I'll prove you wrong, which has always been a strong motivator in my life when someone tells me I can't do something. Or I'm just going to do this because this is what has to happen. This is what has to happen for me to survive, for me to make sure I'm not living the life that my dad lived, or doing the things to my family that my dad did. And that was a very strong motivator, but a lot of times that led me not to reach out for help and connect with others, but to retreat into myself, and into my mind, and to keep my feelings to myself. Then we talked about the heart wound, and how we're all born separated and sinful, and what we need to do to bridge that gap and to regain what was lost from us by entering into relationship with our Creator. Now, there are two ways that every man can choose to live with these wounds. The first way is you can become hardened in your woundedness. And there's a couple stages as this plays out into the life of a man. And I think that this is going to be very eye-opening and a revolution for a lot of men as you connect these dots and we step back and we see this not from just whatever stage we're in, but all the stages all together. So the first stage is every man begins his life without God. His nature is selfish and self-centered. The second stage is, as a son, every man suffers hurts, small or large, growing up, right? And these are where the wounds come into place. And then stage 3 is, as a young man, he constructs his manhood from these selfish and wounded perspectives. Often he uses his woundedness as energy to fuel and excuse his own excessive or evil behavior. And I just want to pause right here because, that was me. And the selfishness and excessive or evil behavior is different degrees for different people. But for me, not having my dad there and feeling rejected and abandoned left me with this huge hole in my heart of wanting to be chosen. And I talk about this all the time. I think that's the number one need of every person, is to be chosen. First chosen by your parents, then chosen by your peers, then chosen by your opposite sex, then chosen by your wife, then chosen by your community, chosen by your Creator. It's at the root of all things, this need to be chosen. And I wanted to feel chosen. And because my dad rejected me, or I felt rejected by my dad, and I felt abandoned by my dad, I turned to unhealthy things to try to fill that healthy need that I had. And as a young man, what that looked like is girls, and getting attention from girls, emotionally and physically. And I've already talked about this in the past, so there's no need to rehash it here for the sake of time. But just what I sacrificed and what I compromised to fill, or to try to fill, that need, and the different things and the different lengths I went to do that. So stage 4, as a man, he is driven by these forces if he doesn't understand and refuse to examine. Circumstances and others are blamed for his problems and failures. This approach to life creates pain for himself and those all around him. That's interesting because the life that we live right now has been constructed primarily by the choices that we've made, choices to things that have happened to us, or things that have, how do I want to say this, things that maybe we had no control over the circumstances, right, but how we chose to react to them, or things that happened because of the choices that we made in different circumstances, right? It's one thing to, for example, like me, to be born without, or to be born and then grow up with a father in and out of my life, and to use that as a crutch and use that as an excuse to do the things that I was doing, and at times I did, but in reality, in every situation, I had a choice of how I was going to act, what decision I was going to choose to make, what type of attitude I was going to have. Was I going to see myself as a victim, or was I going to see myself having an opportunity to change my life? And I don't know where this entered my life, but at a young age, maybe it was because I was so hurt by my dad that I made this inner vow that said I was never going to be like him, and that's what drove me to learn as much as I could and to do as much as I could to basically separate myself from the type of person that I thought he was. Stage 5. Wealthy men often seek to buy their way out of pain. Other men seek to escape their pain with drugs, alcohol, pornography, TV, affairs, sports, etc. Both continue to resume to admit the truth, or to both continue to refuse, refuse to admit the truth about themselves. And this is apparent. We know as guys, we can spot posers a mile away. Sometimes it's easier than others. Having gone through all the stuff regarding manhood, it's like radar for me. I can tell within, a couple of minutes of hanging out with somebody, and it just becomes more apparent. And I'm not trying to call anybody out, because that was me myself. I was a poser at a lot of times, and that's because I continued to lie to myself and lie to others about what I thought and how I felt, and thought that by not sharing my feelings, my true feelings on stuff, that I would be viewed as weak, or that I would be judged, or that I would really be rejected and abandoned, just like I felt my father rejected and abandoned me. And we all know people like this. If we don't want to admit it to ourselves that we struggle with these things, we all know people like this that are struggling with these things. And the truth is we all struggle on some level or another. It's whether we're just going to confront that pain, or we're going to continue to mask it. Stage 6. In time, selfish and wounded manhood hardens. As a man grows old, life becomes small, all about me, empty, mundane, bitter, and reckless. And this makes me think of just some old men that I've been exposed to in my life. The grumpy, nasty old men who are bitter, and they are hardened in their ways and in their views, and they refuse to change. I talk about my grandpa a lot and what an influence he made in my life, and before God really started to do a number on my grandpa and he started to pursue relationship instead of religion. In a lot of ways, he was like this. He was this older, hardened man who lived by the motto, my way or the highway. And he could be very short-tempered, very stubborn and difficult, and difficult at times to get along with. And then when my brother committed suicide, he was changing before that, but that was kind of like when the change really went over the cliff. And I don't know what really happened in his heart and what happened in his mind, but he softened up a lot, and he stopped taking a lot of things in life so seriously. And he started to become a new person as a result. And to what degree that my brother's suicide had on that, I don't know, but I'd be willing to bet it had a huge impact on him, and in that transformation that I saw from my perspective in him. So the second thing is so if you what was that first point here? Let's see. So the first one was you can become hardened in your woundedness, or the second one here is you can be delivered from your woundedness. And what that looks like is right on the left we have all those stages, right? Those natural stages that a man takes through his life. But at any time in a man's life, he can break away from these cascading stages. And he discovers the truth about himself. And he recognizes his selfishness, his godless nature. And he makes a choice to accept responsibility for his life and problems. And he stops blaming others. And as a result, there's a grieving process. And that process is over his losses and or his losses in life and the poor choices that he's made thus far. And we've all at times made poor choices and experienced loss. And what that looks like when you make this discovery and then you recognize these things and then you decide to accept responsibility is you turn to faith in Jesus for help. And we're not gonna, you can read this later, but there's a story, and it's really the story of manhood in the Bible, Luke 15:11-24, and it's a story about the prodigal son. And what happens with the prodigal son is this wealthy man has two sons, and one of the sons goes to his father at, I don't know what particular age, but I could see this person being in their 20s, maybe their late 20s, and they go to their dad a little premature, and they ask their dad for their inheritance. And the dad, being the loving dad that he is, he gives the son the inheritance. And then the son moves off and goes. And with that inheritance, he blows it on a lot of pleasures that the world has to offer him until he has nothing. In the Bible, the story gives a good illustration of what that looks like when he has absolutely nothing, and he's literally in a pig's pen trying to fight the pigs for their slop that they're being fed. And after some time of being in this pen, he remembers his father and his family, and he realizes who he is and the mistakes that he's made. And in that moment, he makes the choice to either stay in the pig pen, or to take responsibility for what he's done and go back to his father. And that's what he does. And he heads back home. And the story talks about how the father sees him from a distance and runs up to him and hugs him and rejoices that his son has returned. And his father doesn't care that he squandered his inheritance. He doesn't care where he's been and what he's done, what evil or what pleasures he's participated in. All he cares is that his son is back with him. And the story goes on to tell how his son calls his servants and tells them to take the son and give him a bath and put a royal robe on him and put the ring on his finger, the family signet ring on his finger, and then to go kill a calf, because they're going to have this big old barbecue and this party to celebrate the son's return. And what that really is that's a picture of our relationship with God, and how we have run away from Him, and how He's just waiting for us to come back. And He doesn't care about where we've been or what we've done. He just wants us to come back and to be able to have a relationship with us, and everything else will fall into place the way that it needs to. So the next step in this is a man becomes born again. And John 3:3 says, Jesus said, very, very, very truly I tell you, no one can see the kingdom of God unless they are born again. And that's not my words. That's Jesus' words. And when a man decides to become born again, he pursues a new life with Christ. And the Bible discusses this in 2 Corinthians 5:17, which says, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come, the old has gone, the new is here. So, we do have a choice to be delivered from our woundedness, and this is what that looks like in our lives. Alright, so that's it for tonight's Man Up lesson. A little preview of what's coming up. We are going to talk about something called the Genesis myth and what that says about manhood. And we're going to start moving forward in this second half of Authentic Manhood. So, appreciate you guys being with me. If you have any questions, leave it in the comments, or if it's something more personal, hit me up. I'm here for you guys. Hope you have a good night, and we'll see you tomorrow for Shout Out Saturday. Love you guys. Take care.